Hello, I'm Maya. Welcome back to the Literary Gladiators. Some dust. I'm in my bedroom, which is exciting because I haven't been here for a while because I got knee surgery. And my bedroom's in the basement, and stairs are hard after knee surgery. But now I've got a wicked scar and lots of spiders to accompany me in this here room. Recently, one of my friends, Marin, suggested that I read Milk-Fed, a novel that's pretty well known, and Marin's description of it was it deals with a Jewish woman and queerness, but there are also some eating things I should keep in mind. And what they meant by this was that there's some disordered eating content within the book. I'm not sure if that's just general content or if it pertains to our main character in specific, but she did let me know before I went into the book because I do have a history with disordered eating. And what was interesting for me was, first of all, I knew that I probably wouldn't be reading the book just because I know that I'm not mentally in a space where I'm ready to re-engage with content that discusses that sort of experience, but it also fully changed my presumptions about or things that I would have associated the title with. Milk-Fed, I don't know, knowing that it had disordered eating content in it changed the connotations of that title for me. It went from maybe being something that was more about relationships generationally, I would have assumed, or queer relationships, into something that was more personal, introspective, and painful. So today I want to talk about content warnings and trigger warnings within books and media and whether or not to proceed with the content to follow. I think especially in the last few years, trigger warnings and content warnings have become a lot more prevalent. Just in case you're not super familiar, they essentially let the reader know of any topics that might come up in the novel that might bring about a negative reaction. And they're largely created for people with PTSD so that they're not triggered upon engaging with the media. For example, Saving Private Ryan, starring Tom Hanks. I'm going into film, I should know this. Starring whoever, was a big topic when it came out. I believe it was Spielberg, and it was so intense and so immersive and so true to so many veterans' experiences in war that it resulted in quite a few panic attacks in theaters across America and with just general audiences. Now, some may say that that means it was art truly informed by the world, an art that really was thoughtful and empathetic and caused such a visceral reaction from its viewers. Others might consider it a sort of cruel re-affliction of past traumas on people. Do I think trigger warnings and content warnings can be valuable? Yes, I do, and I want to make sure you understand that this comes from the place of someone who's not really struggled with diagnosed PTSD, at least, and who has had a very privileged life in general. So my experiences, for instance, watching, say, Saving Private Ryan, which I have yet to see to the chagrin of my dad, would be definitely different than a veteran of the United States military or anyone who has engaged in armed violent conflict. Overall, I think content warnings help balance both the contents of, in our case, books or media, and its audience. It helps them compromise on what is going to come and kind of lays a foundation so both, and I'm talking about books as if they're sentient here, which of course they're not, but both the author and their audience has an agreement going in that this is something that you're going to be exposed to, and your reactions have been forewarned. Instead of allowing art to simply happen to its engager, content warnings allow for there to be some preamble, some emotional preparation, and it also allows people who can't engage in the content safely to back away while they can. Sometimes for the worse, but generally I would say probably for the better, whether that be to preserve their mental health or because they're not yet in a space where they're ready to re-immerse themselves in such a situation, whether it be, as in the case of Milk-Fed, with disordered eating or with abusive relationships, rape, etc. On the other hand, another interesting side to explore is that content warnings reduce media into one simple theme. And I think that can definitely be something that allows art to become more flat and less three-dimensional. That's implied, but you know what I mean, and that thus impairs the audience's experience with it. I think a pretty decent illustration of this phenomenon could be George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, more commonly known as The Game of Thrones. By putting a rape warning or a mistreatment of people who are not cishet men at the beginning of the book, a lot of audience members may enter into the series with a kind of warped perception of what the aim of the author was and what the the outcome of their experience may be. Because while these things do exist within the world of Game of Thrones and are sometimes described in a way that I think is irresponsible on the part of George R.R. Martin, it's not the bulk of the series, nor is it the way we connect with characters, nor largely are these things major plot points, at least in the first 2 books that I have read, which are A Game of Thrones and then I think, not A Storm of Swords, Clash of Kings, I want to say. Clash of Kings, let's go with that. This means that people entering into the world of George R.R. Martin with these content warnings beforehand without exploring the world or having the ability to form conclusions about the way that these topics are dealt with in context, it means that they may have a warped perception of the series itself, of its themes, and maybe missing out on an art piece that would be really valuable to them imaginatively or personally. And that is a pretty harsh example. I think that all content generally, of course, I'm sure there are like special circumstances, but I think all content dealing with sexual abuse should have content warnings out of respect for the audience and for the violence of the world that we live in. But at the same time, I think it's important that content warnings remain proportional to what they are describing and do not necessarily inform the reader or moviegoer or playgoer's perspective of the piece as a whole, but just allow them to understand what they're going into, at least in part. Give them the opportunity to back away if it's not something that they're interested in, or allow them to pursue what's going to happen, continue on with the story with caution. For me, this means I will probably not be reading Milk Fed for quite some time. I did download it from the library audiobook server, but I'm going to return it because I know myself enough to know that I'm not in a space that is conducive to exploring such topics at the moment, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I won't be 3 years down the line. It doesn't mean I won't be able to engage with that media later, but it does mean I'm more informed on what I could potentially be getting myself into. I think the risk that exists with content warnings is the difficulty balancing compassion and generosity in media with the idea of making sure that one is not reducing art, a book, a magazine, a play, a movie, into something flat. It's not reducing its complexity into something that is just merely a part of it and just a stepping stone in the themes that it may be able to express. Another YouTuber, Broey DeChanel, who covers analytical topics pertaining to film primarily on this platform, recently made a video about, I believe, Greta Gerwig and the way in which her art is frequently flattened in light of criticism. An example was Lady Bird as well as Little Women, both of which were critiqued for their portrayals of white feminism, which I think is a valid critique, specifically in the case of Little Women, in which case the cast definitely could have been diversified a lot more. Something can be respectful and an ode to the original, like Little Women, while also moving forward and making change and being its own thing. But this YouTuber discussed how sometimes the critiques of specifically Lady Bird were sometimes not entirely full-dimensional because they discounted the commentary that the movie made on itself and the lack of awareness within its characters that it addressed within its own script. The video is really quite well done, and I enjoyed its reflection on the ways in which writing, if taken at surface value, can be diminished into a simple theme or plot or critique, when in reality writing, just as writers are, tends to be much more complex and nuanced than that. It's a video I definitely recommend watching, and while in a different vein from this topic, I think it's related in the idea of flattening art. I'd be interested to hear what you think. I'm not sure I have a fully formed black nor white opinion on this topic, but I think it's a really interesting one to explore, whether or not the experience of the individual or the impact of the art should be considered more potently when including content warnings and trigger warnings in media. Thank you so much to the Literary Gladiators for having me. I hope you've enjoyed this video, however short and sweet it may be. And I'll see you guys in October for my final video on this channel, which is really exciting. I've loved being here, and I've loved engaging with all of you. And until then, I'll be in college then. We can explore California together. It's going to be a whirlwind adventure. Yes, it will. Anyway, until then.